Excellent, great. So yeah, we'll get started then. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for having us. Laura, is your microphone working okay?
Yeah, hello everyone, just checking the microphone's okay.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Just a little bit of overview of what we'd like to talk to you about today in terms of our presentation, thinking about introducing Turnitin during this COVID-19 pandemic. We'll start with some background, we'll then introduce the context of the course and the unique environment that we're at with Duke Kunshan University. I'll pass over to Laura, who will discuss the results and the discussion, the implications, and we'll try and end with some recommendations that hopefully will be useful for others to implement within their context. So in terms of Turnitin, it was already mentioned in the previous presentation by Ben and Dan. I'm sure most of us here are familiar with Turnitin as an assessment software, but for those who may not be, I'll just do a very brief introduction. Turnitin, as many people may know, is a match detection software, and it's widely used by over 15,000 institutions across 140 different countries. The idea mainly is that this software, when students submit their written submissions for assignments, their text will be compared with other written submissions in a large database of over 600 million student papers, as well as many other online web-based texts. Now, the software Turnitin is often termed an anti-plagiarism or a plagiarism detection software. However, is this accurate? Of course, this is what Turnitin does, but is this view and this perception of Turnitin accurate? Is this appropriate? This could potentially be a negative perception of students in terms of the benefits Turnitin may have. So we're thinking here in today's talk a little bit more about, are there any other potential uses of the software, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic where I think Ben especially mentioned this, obviously with assessment taking place more at home, more independence of learners. Can Turnitin be used to help the assessment process rather than just check against the Turnitin? I think increased mobility of students now with this COVID pandemic as well, it's something that was touched on in the previous presentation. This perhaps does provide more opportunities for students to, with the increased use of online resources, perhaps to plagiarize. So a really nice paper from Kostka and Maliborska in the TESOL EJ journal pointed out that, as I've just mentioned, most institutions do use Turnitin punitively. But they tend to look more at the benefits in terms of an L2 writing feedback tool. And we would highly recommend for those of you who would like to learn more about Turnitin to explore this paper. They used Turnitin in an advanced second language writing course, and they provided a very detailed outline of some of the key features, especially for providing feedback on assessments. Some of those features, which we also looked at in our presentation I'll explain today, included using the grade mark feature, which can increase efficiency for graders. Lots of quick mark options there to expand maybe grammatical feedback features, and also provides a lot of versatility in terms of those feedback comments. Also, integrating a rubric within the electronic feedback process can improve transparency of the grading. Turnitin allows you to provide personalized voice comments, so you can provide commentary and personalized voice feedback, which has also been proven to be beneficial. And also, as it comes back to Turnitin focus on source use, the information provided in the similarity report is very helpful in giving feedback on student source use. So a little bit about our methodology. As Jonathan mentioned, our teaching context is Duke Kunshan University in China. This is a newly established liberal arts Sino-US University between Duke University in the US and Wuhan University in China. We're still developing our 4-year undergraduate liberal arts curriculum, so it provides us with a lot of opportunities for developing policy, introducing technologies and applications, and our university is currently considering using Turnitin at our university. Now, this is quite a rare opportunity. Most institutions, they have a policy where they use Turnitin for all written assessments, and that's the norm at the institution. So all students are used to this, all lecturers are used to this. Whereas our context, we had 1 semester without Turnitin, using regular submissions and assessment processes. And then in the second semester, we introduced Turnitin as part of a trial. So we feel that our students are very well placed to be able to compare, life without Turnitin in terms of their assessments and their feedback, and then obviously life with Turnitin. The coronavirus pandemic, as we all know, meant a rapid shift to online teaching. So this introduction of Turnitin was timed when students were studying online, all classes were online. And it should be mentioned that our department, the Language and Culture Centre, we really strongly promote independent language learning. So we wanted to look at with our courses how Turnitin could be used, yes, as an assessment tool, yes, as a feedback tool, but also could it be used to promote independent language learning through students' process of written assessments. So we looked at both the graduate students and undergraduate students in this trial. I taught the graduate program, which is a 14-week first year graduate program in academic writing, and there were 20 participants there. And the classes there were taught asynchronously using pre-recorded Zoom lectures and asynchronous discussions. And Laura, who's going to talk to you shortly, she taught the undergraduate EAP course, again, first year students, but this was only a 7-week course, so it was a shorter course. And there were 32 participants, and that course was synchronous. So in terms of the research questions we'll discuss today, obviously we're limited with time, so we'll just focus really on 2 areas that we feel might be beneficial and useful to share our results with you today. First of all, how do students use Turnitin to support their academic written assessments? And secondly, what are students' perceptions of using Turnitin as a feedback tool? So in terms of the methodology, we use Turnitin in both of these courses in the second semester as a trial. Not only did we use this for the final submission of written assessments, we actually used it during the writing process as well. So for first drafts, second drafts, and also for final submissions. As mentioned in the background, we try to use as many of these recommended feedback tools for Turnitin as possible. And we also use the peer mark feature to provide students the opportunity to do peer review of their classmates' assignments and also self-review as well. The students were invited to complete a post-course questionnaire involving 22 questions, and they included both quantitative and qualitative data, open and closed questions, and everybody was involved. So we had 20 graduates and 32 undergraduates in terms of a response rate. Based on what we did for our context at our university, obviously we'll share our results with you today and we'll discuss this today, but in terms of the trial, we're trying to see if this is something that's going to be useful for the whole university. So we have written reports for the university in terms of areas of potential good practice, and we've also given presentations on this to the wider faculty at the university. Our intention at Duke Kunshan University is perhaps not to, if we feel this is a successful trial, it's not necessarily to have a blanket university-wide adoption of Turnitin. Our vision instead is to perhaps use this as an optional tool that lecturers may wish to use in their course if they feel it's beneficial. So I'll pass over to Laura now, who will talk briefly about our results and our discussion.
Sorry, muted. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Joe. So yes, results and discussion. As Joe mentioned, we trialled Turnitin at DKU for the first time with first year undergraduate students and postgraduate students. From an undergraduate perspective, we teach in 7-week blocks. So over the course of the academic year, we have 4 7-week courses as opposed to 2 semesters, which is how the grad program runs. So purely for comparison purposes, the statistics you're seeing here, or the percentages you're seeing here, are from a 14-week graduate course and 1 7-week block of undergraduate students. And the reason for that is because the students move and change every 7 weeks. So all the undergrad students have to take EAP, but they wouldn't necessarily all have me for that EAP course. They will go around different professors and have a different experience based on their scheduling. So firstly, taking a look at the number of students that agreed Turnitin made them think more carefully about plagiarism, and also the number of students that found the similarity report for assignments to be helpful. Both of those came out to be pretty high for both the graduate and the undergraduate students, which was very pleasing for us to see that after its initial use, you know, students were already thinking about Turnitin, about plagiarism, about their becoming consciously aware of its importance to them. Still, as you know, a relatively good number thought more carefully about citing sources, and 84% of the undergrad students is quite a good number, because we talk about plagiarism and introducing how to reference, how to cite, how to paraphrase, particularly in the first 2 sessions, so the first semester, if you will. So coming into the second semester, this should already be sort of a skill that they've acquired and that they're just practicing. Okay, thanks, Joe. So we'll just take a look at some of the qualitative comments now. So looking at the undergraduates firstly, so posing the question, describe how you use Turnitin and the similarity report during the drafting and editing process of writing assignments. You can just see a couple of quotes here on the screen from the UG students, and we've underlined there and bolded some of the message, if you will, from the students to demonstrate the focus on independence and independent language learning, because it's, as Joe mentioned, it's something that's really central to the Language and Culture Centre, to our faculty. And so we want to really sort of identify where and if the students are becoming more and more independent through using this tool. So after submitting my essay on Turnitin, I will check the similarity report, I will edit my essay, I will check my citation formats. So we can see clearly here that this student is basically doing what we want them to do. They're using the tool to help them rather than to simply avoid doing something. They're going through a process. You know, which is pleasing to see the students doing this. This is what we wanted from the trial. And then the bottom one, when I finish writing my essay, I'll put it on Turnitin first. I'll change some quotations to paraphrasing. So they're identifying where maybe they're overquoting or potentially not paraphrasing very well in some cases, and going back to that. And we'll just take a look at some comments from the grad students, or postgraduate students, sorry. As for the similarity report, I would use it as a tool to see my paraphrase quality. So again, looking at the quality of the paraphrasing, checking that they're not doing this sort of patchwork plagiarism where they just change a few words around, or where maybe, you know, they haven't quite grasped the skill of paraphrasing at that point. And then the last one there, so I would have a glance. I would usually refine them in the next version of the draft. So again, just emphasizing this process the students are going through, you know, to support their academic writing journey. Now they're doing this in EAP, but, you know, if we could sort of transfer this into other courses as well, you know, so that they can continue with this writing journey throughout their time as a student and beyond, you know, that could be really powerful and certainly very independent. So we'll take a look at a couple of other questions now. So looking more specifically at student perceptions. So what were their students thought the feedback was more detailed than previous methods? Only 50% of the undergraduate students came back and thought this, whereas, you know, a much larger percentage of the grad students did. And again, the same with the number of students that thought feedback was easier to understand than previous methods. And this is, you know, a bit of a trend with this sort of category of questioning here. And the results indicate this difference, and we can infer why this difference might have arisen. And it could be for a number of reasons, including potentially the age of the students and their prior experience with education. So certainly the majority of undergraduate first-year students have come straight through education systems, even if those who went to international schools, as apart from you know, standard mainstream Chinese high schools, they still potentially weren't made aware very much of referencing citation styles, if at all, or the use of Turnitin in any way, whereas grad students may have had exposure before, possibly. Also in terms of the student composition, so as I mentioned before, the graduate students, postgraduate students stay together. They're a much smaller course of students. They have much less exposure to different faculty, different ways of giving and receiving feedback, and different, you know, input practices. Whereas in the UG program, you know, they're having a 7-week course and they're changing those 7-week courses all the time. So they're much more broadly exposed to different professors, different ways of working, and getting different types of feedback as well. One of the things we found, for example, so with that second question, the number of students that thought it was easier to understand than previous methods, when the students download a report from Turnitin, all of the quick mark or on text comments where you might highlight and like type a comment for them, or where you might drag and drop like little quick marks that then expand and give a more detailed explanation. All of those, when you download the PDF, appear at the bottom. And so students found that quite confusing really, and actually not very helpful at all. They wanted to see it in text. Whereas if you compare that to say giving feedback through simply Microsoft Word and you're giving comments in the margin, you know, it's much more easy just to download that Word document and see those comments there systematically. So that was, without making it too personal, somewhat of a disappointment, I think, for some students, you know, compared to what they might have experienced before. And again, this notion of it being more personal than other methods. So, you know, the thing with Turnitin is it can be used as a speed grader. And even though you can write personal comments, and as part of the trial, we did give personal feedback comments as well in terms of voice comments to try and, you know, we were very conscious of bridging that gap that we experienced because of COVID-19, and being on the screen is no substitute for being in person, right? So even just a 3-minute voice comment on Turnitin was slightly more personal than typing, we thought. But even that really hasn't come up through their feedback. So again, the time of which this was introduced is also worth considering here. So just to look at some of the qualitative feedback, then, just keeping my eye on the time. What are the advantages of receiving feedback on Turnitin compared to other methods? Well, if we take a look at this second quote here, Turnitin can provide feedback almost immediately, which we know, which is great. Only it has database, so it can compare my quote or paraphrasing with the original works and highlight similar parts for me. It also has the voice comments function. So here we can see the students thinking about the actual feedback function that it provides. You know, we can see the students here, and you know, I'm able to read other students' papers from a professor's aspect again. So they're taking this independent approach. We do encourage peer review. We did use the peer mark tools there, and it's just really, you know, this qualitative feedback is just showing us their perception of its use. So it's not just a deterrent, it is a tool to help them. And again, with the postgraduate students on the next slide, I was able to review another's draft, and I found problems that could happen to myself. So they're experiencing, you know, through sharing of each other's work, not just learning from themselves, but from each other. The comments could be delivered by voice or written. Very helpful feedback, makes us think about the writing rubrics, etc. And as I'll mention in a few minutes when we summarize, having this rubric on text, quick marks, voice comments, all in one place, all on your learning management system. The idea was to make this a lot easier for students. So taking a quick look at the recommendations moving forward. In terms of promoting the use of Turnitin, you know, we are in the process of making recommendations to the university. It is a newly developed university. There is a lot of, you know, focus on for and against tools like Turnitin. Obviously, you know, we're keen on Turnitin. Joe and I had past experience of using Turnitin. And so, of course, initially we want to promote it, but we only want to do that, of course, if it's going to be useful to our community. And we've found so far that Turnitin is useful to our community in terms of our needs as EAP teachers with a writing focus in our courses, in terms of promoting that independence with students and that independent language learning culture that we're building in our faculty. Working with students in class, and I think, you know, everyone who uses Turnitin, you know, will have had the question of, you know, what similarity percentage do I need to have to, you know, not be plagiarism? What is the magic number? And certainly in my previous job, I spent an enormous amount of time explaining to my colleagues and students that there is no magic number necessarily, and it's about how you infer meaning from the report and you know, and about how you use the report to help and guide you. So having this sort of blank canvas and this fresh slate at DKU has really allowed us to sort of minimize that emphasis on magic numbers from the word go. you know, and to focus on the well formatting of the reference list and to compare, you know, what it should be to what it is, and go back and make those changes. Obviously, whenever you bring in a new tool, there has to be some kind of training. Joe and I, heavily involved in creating the documents, the support documents, if you will, the how-to guides for the university for faculty and students as well. And sort of, you know, making sure that it's a very easy process, as enjoyable as it can be, if you will, and using Turnitin as like an ed tech tool to help them, as opposed to prevention from something that's negative, which Joe alluded to earlier, to keep this positive spin on things. If you already have Turnitin in your institution and there's already this sort of connotation towards Turnitin as a deterrent rather than a helpful tool, then of course you can try and change that just by constantly emphasizing its use, and also by simply allowing multiple submissions on documents. Now, in some cases, and certainly if you're looking at one-time submission testing and for the needs of Turnitin, like in the previous presentation, then multiple submissions isn't really an option for you. But as a learning tool, as part of the EAP teaching and learning process, we highly advocate for that, and I know a lot of places will, you know, they use that feature. And then the use of peer mark for unanonymized peer feedback. So we haven't had much chance to talk about that, and you know, I'm conscious of the time, but peer feedback, unanonymized, we found worked more effectively because it allowed the students to take more ownership of it. And with the guided question design of Turnitin and the easy enough interface to use online, the students came back and found that quite autonomous, actually. And then finally, varied feedback methods useful for online and hybrid instruction, of course. And at this time in the pandemic and the way the world is today, having tools and systems in place that can be used in hybrid format is, of course, favourable to many of us in the environment. So at this point, I'll say thank you very much for listening. And Joe and I will be delighted to take your questions now, if you have any. And I think the presentation is uploaded, so if you need to go back or look at the references, then they're there for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura and Joseph, for your wonderful presentation. Like Laura said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat box. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask.
Of course.
You mentioned quite a bit about a peer feedback system, and I know some teachers can be a little hesitant at trying to introduce peer or self-feedback systems in their classrooms. Do you have any suggestions for teachers on how they can try and introduce a peer feedback system in their class?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So again, for me, I've been working with first-year undergraduate students, which, you know, you might argue is slightly easier because you can almost sort of mold, you know, as part of the university culture, you know, you can start afresh, start a precedent with what's expected of you at that level. But students, of course, are always hesitant when it comes to being constructively critical with one another, particularly in my experience, and the majority of my learners are Chinese, and they don't feel very comfortable with giving feedback that's in any way negative or constructive, and so it's about finding ways and opportunities for them to see value in that. And I think the Turnitin platform provides some very good guiding questions that are written in a way that don't feel like the students are giving too much critique, if you will. I also find it is a lot about the guidance that you give them. In my experience as well. Now, Joe might have had a slightly different experience with the grad students. Of course, postgrad students have had, you know, all of their undergrad years before them, and so they've had different exposure, and so they might not have been as welcoming to adopt peer feedback. Joe?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think especially as we're working with Chinese students as well, you know, don't want to overgeneralize, but you know, there is a generalization that many of these students, they do still see, you know, they want the feedback from their professor, that's you know, who they look towards. So I think a lot of it is about trying to get buy-in early on in about the process. What are your beliefs about peer feedback? What are the benefits of it? So try to frame it in a way as well, you know, if you're looking at the rubric and you're applying these very, very specific questions that, you know, we have written ourselves, and you apply that feedback process to your peer, you're not only giving them help and suggestions, but you're becoming more aware of your own work as well. And hopefully, the benefits will be not only for your classmates, but also for you. I think it takes time. And for example, early rounds of peer feedback, they might not be as detailed or as clear or as effective, but through training and through, through discussion of what worked well and what didn't work well, I think students do tend to, they too tend to work with it. I think the features of the peer mark on Turnitin are really useful for helping in terms of just a quick integrated system, especially with the online teaching and COVID, because it can automatically distribute straight away. It's there, it's integrated in a really nice interface. I think Laura mentioned earlier, the bank of questions in Turnitin are quite nice for general written submission feedback, and then you can add your own really specific questions related to the rubric or things like that.
Thank you both. We've just received a question from Tracy. I'm quite curious about this question as well. Some lecturers believe that allowing multiple submissions to Turnitin encourages the reworking of plagiarized work until it isn't recognized by Turnitin, kind of, trying to learn how to play the system, I suppose. So how do you discourage this kind of practice?
Yes, I think this is a great question. And in my previous role, we used to work for a British university before we moved over to DKU. And I used to spend quite a large amount of time with my colleagues and my students, trying to discourage this type of practice. And I think the way that, again, we've been fortunate because we're bringing this into a new university, so we almost have a blank canvas with that, which I know a lot of other institutions don't have. But what we would do and what we've been able to do so far is just constantly reinforce why we're using Turnitin, and so to take the ethos away from simply checking for plagiarism, but it's there to help you improve your writing on your journey. So in our EAP courses, we're doing multiple drafts of the same assignment, and so they're using it as a learning tool rather than a checking tool. And I think it's just that small distinction between checking and learning. And I know, again, from my past experience of working in UK higher ed, that it's potentially not that easy. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to write multiple drafts of the same assignment, and there is, different needs, different deadlines, different ways of working. And again, I'm overgeneralizing on my own experience here, but I think the key thing that we have done that seems to be making a difference here is changing that emphasis with everybody. So whether it's the instructors themselves, or whether it's the messages in the written documentation or the videos that we're making for self-help, it's constantly using this sort of self-help ethos, as opposed to check that it's not plagiarized, but have a look at how you've done it and let's see if you can make it better for yourself to improve your own writing. Joe?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the context that we have introduced this Turnitin to as well is also important. It's first year students, so both first year graduate students and also first year undergraduate students. We haven't yet taken this any further. So because they're still very early in their development of, academic writing at that level, whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate, perhaps, as they go into their next year of study, we could, change that policy, but we see this more as a scaffolding in the early stages of their development. But whether we would, continue with this, maybe we would limit the number of submissions in future. That's something that would be, discussed with the university, but it's definitely a consideration that is worth thinking about, and maybe, maybe speaking to students about the process and, in a little bit more detail. I think it's a great question.
And again, just before we finish with that, we did the initial trial with the EAP courses, which have a different focus to say main content courses. So the next round of the trial, which we're actually in at the moment, it's being used now with more EAP courses and more instructors to get a much wider perspective, and also with one of the core content courses. So we're going to get their perspective on how they used it in a more content-based course. That every student has to take that course. So eventually every freshman student will be exposed to this and will get feedback and different perspectives on it. But certainly, you know, whether they allow multiple submissions will be down to their course team, and how they decide to use it will be down to their course team. We can only recommend based on obviously an EAP perspective on what we've done and how we've wanted to use it. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see where our trial goes in the next stages before we decide to adopt or not as an institution the full license. So yeah.
Well, good luck here. I'm very curious about your results at the university. Well, maybe, who knows, maybe next year you can come back and give us an update.
Yeah, I mean, we've been to New Directions a few times and we always enjoy it. So thank you very much to you and the rest of the organisers for everything you've done, especially putting this on. It's a huge achievement to move conferences like this online. And although we'd love to be in Singapore, we're in the UK at the moment. So yeah, it's great to get together with the wider community around the world and have this opportunity. So thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming and listening and asking questions. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you. Coming up next in this room after the break will be Paul Muir, Eunice McAllister and Joyce McIntyre. I'm presuming that's 3 Scottish people, on remote proctoring, ensuring assessment opportunities in a pandemic. Have a nice little break and I hope to see you there.